The Blood Groom by Damien Davis Toman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 1. Beverly knew that it was dark now. The voices coming from around the reception desk and over the public announcement system having acquired a certain signature of cool resignation, tempered upon a forge of continuous alarm. It was a state of anxious semi-suspension, particular to the emergency room, one which Beverly had felt before, and hated now, though she had asked for it, had expected it. The late afternoon was the time to do it, she had always believed. In the night one can dream, in the morning one can hope. Late afternoon was the time of truth. Beverly loved the sound of sirens, and the galloping of her heart when she knew that the sirens were hers, its little valves pumping in and out, out some more, an exultant march of glory from the hollow of her breast, out to freedom through the broad gate she had opened in her arms. The dour effects of nightfall were most irritating as they filtered through the eternal fluorescence upon the thick-waisted nurse who at last came to visit Beverly after the brief and orderly tumult of bringing her off the stretcher an eternity ago. She had her hair pulled behind her with a hot pink band, and her obscene V-neck scrub was printed with teddy bears and rubber balloons. She sat down upon the seat beside Beverly's and, reaching for her bandages, said, "Now then, let's see what we've got here," in a tone of milky concern. Beverly took a quick hissing breath as the nurse peeled up an edge of the crackling self-adhesive gauze, yanking apart the pads of cotton beneath, which were soaked to the last fiber with blood. "Oh yeah," the nurse exhaled. "You did a pretty nice job on yourself. We're going to have to change these." A white basket the nurse had brought with her supplied the new gauze and pads, and Beverly watched with unflinching interest as her handiwork was brought again into the open air, a frenzy of criss-crossing razor strokes still gushing from their middles. The nurse told her to hold her arm out straight and flat, then, pressing a new, somewhat larger pad down upon it, asked Beverly to hold it in place while she began winding the gauze around the knob of her thin and childlike wrist. The same was done to the right arm as to the left, though Beverly, being right-handed, the abrasions made by her non-dexterous left hand were less impressive. Many of these were mostly dried, bubbling up only where the multitude of razor tracks intersected, and sending dark red droplets spinning down the arm's curve. With the effects of Beverly's earlier exertions hidden again from sight, the nurse took her blood pressure for the third time since she was placed in the ambulance, and asked if she was feeling dizzy or faint. "No, just cold," Beverly said. The nurse took a papery blue blanket from a nearby closet and promised again that the doctor really did know that Beverly was there and really was on her way. Since her watch and her cell phone had been taken off and locked away immediately upon her admission, Beverly leaned forward and craned her neck to see the round-faced plastic clock mounted on the pale wall above her. She had been there at least 2 hours, doing nothing but shivering and watching a cable television news show that she couldn't call up the energy to change. Pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders, Beverly sighed and tried to cross her arms, which blared forth in a fiery cry of pain. She had settled into the idea of waiting even longer, but as the nurse hoisted her basket of bandages down the hallway, Beverly saw her almost collide with the doctor, who flew around a corner with her identification tag sweeping in broad arcs before her. The two made a brief exchange, terminating with the nurse nodding in Beverly's direction, and the doctor smiling tersely and giving the nurse an approving touch on her fleshy elbow before they both plunged forward on their respective paths. "Beverly," said the doctor as she advanced, "you've come back for another visit. Without loyal customers like you, this whole hospital would go bust." Beverly found it appropriate to forego the meager smile that might have been her normal response to such acerbity. She looked for some reply, but came up empty, so she gritted her teeth and stared at the floor tiles instead. The doctor, whose name was Laura Wolfe, treated Beverly with more familiarity than she expected from a person who had met her only once and under similar circumstances. Dr. Wolfe swooped down into the seat that the nurse had lately relinquished and, predictably, made an immediate motion for Beverly's rebandaged left arm, as if anything could be discerned by the thick spirals of gauze and odd protrusions of cotton fuzz. "So, how have you been?" the doctor asked absently. "Okay," said Beverly. "Uh-huh," said Dr. Wolfe, turning her attention to the other arm. "And how are things with your father? With school?" "Fine," said Beverly. "Everything's just the same." "And you've been seeing the counselor we assigned to you, yes? Any complaints there?" "No complaints," said Beverly. "He's a very nice man." The doctor looked Beverly softly in the eye, causing Beverly to glance away and fix her gaze on the shadow beneath the television. "So, if everything was fine before, and everything is still fine now," the doctor asked, "how did you find yourself here again?" Beverly shrugged and made no expression. "Well," said Dr. Wolfe, her voice slipping down an octave, "since I heard of your arrival a couple of hours ago, I've been talking to a lot of different people." Beverly nodded. Dr. Wolfe continued. "I spoke to your father, who left an important client in the middle of a meeting and came all the way to the hospital before deciding not to come in because he didn't want to see how angry he was. I spoke to the Monsignor, who's faced with the task of explaining how you managed to do this to yourself on school grounds during school hours. I spoke to Dennis, the therapist we gave you, who almost refused to believe me, saying that you've made fantastic progress together in the past 3 months. I even spoke to Cynthia, the poor girl who discovered you in the bathroom and had to be driven here in her own ambulance and treated for shock. And do you know what they all say?" Beverly very slightly shook her head, knocking a veil of burnt brown bangs down in front of her still lowered eyes. "No," she muttered. "What?" "They all say that they don't know what to say," said Dr. Wolfe. "And for my part, neither do I." At last Beverly looked up and, still making no particular expression, said, "I don't get what the big mystery is. Lots of girls cut. I can name 5 or 6 other cutters in my class right now, off the top of my head. One of my roommates cuts. I even know a boy who cuts. This is so far from being unusual." "Cutting is not the word for what you've done, Beverly," Dr. Wolfe said. "Cutters are discreet and non-committal. They hurt themselves just enough to express or distract from what's bothering them. Then they put on long sleeves and go and see a concert. You, on the other hand, stationed yourself in a public bathroom, ravaged your arms practically beyond recognition, scrawled characters on the mirrors in blood, and sat on the floor laughing hysterically until Cynthia walked in and literally fell face down in a pool of your blood. What you did was more like a suicidal piece of performance art, and yet you insist that you didn't want to die." "I didn't," said Beverly. "I don't." "Okay, so you wanted to make a statement," Dr. Wolfe said. "But a statement about what?" "I don't know," Beverly muttered. I really don't know. I guess I just like blood." Dr. Wolfe sat blinking at Beverly for several moments before clearing her throat and turning her eyes to a clipboard of papers she had carried in under her arm. "Whatever the matter is, Beverly, it's relatively clear that you need help dealing with it, and that it's quite beyond the scope of anything your father, your school, or your therapist can provide. Now, I've discussed with your father the possibility of keeping you." "Keeping me?" asked Beverly. Dr. Wolfe spoke over the interlocution. "Of keeping you with us in the ward until we can be quite sure that your needs can be adequately met on an outpatient basis, and that you're no longer any danger to yourself or whomever else your tendencies might affect." "So you're committing me," said Beverly damply. "Could you honestly have expected otherwise?" asked Dr. Wolfe. "Starting when?" asked Beverly. "Starting now. Tonight," Dr. Wolfe said. "I spoke to your father outside less than an hour ago, and I have his signature here." Beverly squirmed out of her seat and threw her blanket aside. "Wait, no, forget it," she said, her voice level but quite urgent. "I need to talk to my father. I want to go back home. This was all just a stupid mistake. I was just screwed up, that's all. I'm afraid this isn't voluntary, Beverly, Dr. Wolf said. Just sit and collect yourself for a minute, and I'll bring you upstairs when I finish the paperwork. No, Beverly said, almost shouting. No, this is idiotic. I want my uniform back. I'll go back and apologize to everybody. I'll do it tonight. Apologizing isn't what this is about, said Dr. Wolf, rising sharply to her feet. Now please sit down before I call for security. Security, cried Beverly. I did this to myself. If I can tell myself to do it, I can tell myself not to just as easily. I don't want to stay here. I can't stay here. Do you understand? As Beverly went on stocking feet to rattle the knob of the closet where she had seen her blood-caked clothes taken, Dr. Wolf held her arms out across the doorway of the waiting area and called down the hall. Carl! Carl, some help, please. A stocky guard in a white shirt came jogging in and nodded as Dr. Wolf said, This young lady needs to be brought to Ward 3 immediately. He jumped at Beverly, dwarfing her in his broad shadow and gripping her beneath the shoulder. Beverly screamed, her feet slipping helplessly on the floor beneath her as she tried to kick away. Another guard, a slender man, appeared silently and clutched Beverly's ankles, hoisting her into the air, with Carol's big hands grasping her tightly beneath the arms. Beverly roared as the third man wheeled in a stretcher, and they swung her onto it, yanking tight straps over her bandaged wrists and white knee-high socks. In a moment, she had been rushed into an elevator, with Dr. Wolf scuttling beside her, chanting, Beverly, calm down, calm down. After a momentary ascent, Dr. Wolf hurried ahead of the stretcher and the guards, and as Beverly heaved against her bonds, she could see the doctor striking her security guard through a succession of heavy sliding doors, which were then punched closed as Beverly's head passed through them. Her heart dashed madly against the wall of her breast. Her eyes flitted from face to face, connected by long blurs of white light as they reeled together down corridor after corridor, swinging around corners, the rattling of wheels and beeping of machines pouring through her ears. Beverly apprehended the futility of crying out, but moans and howls erupted from her in spite of it. Her terror was too great to suppress. She had never known such powerlessness before. Past doors marked Ward 3, Beverly was maneuvered into a dark room where the faint yellow light from the outside stretched a thin, feeble ribbon across the floor, opposite to a small shaded window. By now Beverly had lost her strength for screaming. She could only whisper as the stretcher came to a halt, and she heard a door clicking shut as the dimly visible guards worked upon the straps that held her arms and feet. Dr. Wolf stood beside her with a hand upon her shoulder. We're going to let you stay here for the night, to give you time to calm down, said Dr. Wolf. Do you think we need to restrain you any longer, or would you prefer to move freely? Her face burning with tears, Beverly sat up and drew her legs against her chest, her thickly bandaged arms folded beneath them. No more restraints, please, she pleaded meekly, her body shivering. She wanted more than anything to be off the stretcher, to be set someplace solid and immobile. There's a bed here, all ready for you, said Dr. Wolf. Does that sound nice? Yes, please, I want to get down, Beverly sobbed. The guards each took one of her arms, and she slid to the edge of the stretcher, casting her legs over and slipping down onto the cold floor. Rather than letting her go there, they led her immediately to the bed, where it was clear that she was to lie down. Dr. Wolf pulled back the sheets, and Beverly crawled obediently beneath them, her head sinking deep into a foreign and antiseptic-smelling pillow. A light flickered on overhead, and Beverly saw the room around her, blank and confining, with a desk and a chair in one corner, and another empty bed beside the one in which she lay, with an open curtain strung between them. You're completely safe here, said Dr. Wolf, from yourself especially, which you must realize is the most important thing right now. We're all going to work together just for a little while to try and understand what makes you want to hurt yourself, and as soon as it's all sorted out and you're feeling better, your father will come and take you home. Presently a nurse ventured quietly into the room, carrying a tiny paper cup in one hand and a cupful of water in the other. She handed both to Dr. Wolf and slipped back out, pulling the door tight behind her. Dr. Wolf brought them down to where Beverly could see the contents of the smaller cup, 2 tiny pills, one pink and one green. I want you to take these and get some sleep, said Dr. Wolf. Tomorrow somebody will show you around the ward, and I'm sure you'll start to feel quite at home. Beverly glanced down at the pills and pulled back a little, wincing as she leaned upon one of her lacerated arms. "What are those?" she asked. "You've had an exciting day," said Dr. Wolf. "These will help to calm your nerves so you can sleep. Everyone here takes them. I'm afraid it's one of the rules." Dr. Wolf pushed the cup insistently, and Beverly, loath to have the security guard summoned again, saw little to do but to tip the pills down her throat and flush them with a quick sip of water. Parched from her previous struggles, she finished the rest of the water with a second gulp and fell down suddenly on her pillow, rolling her eyes in the direction of the window. "Good job, Beverly," the doctor said. "Now, do you promise you'll try to rest?" "Yes," breathed Beverly, avoiding the doctor's gaze. "All right," said Dr. Wolf. "There's a nurse right outside at the desk if there's anything you need, and the bathroom is right over there in the corner. The nurse will give you towels and soap to shower with in the morning. In just a moment I'll send somebody in one last time to take your vital signs. Sleep tight." Beverly nodded faintly, her eyes never moving from the window, and listened as Dr. Wolf glided from the room. As promised, the same nurse who had delivered the pills and water returned a moment later, wheeling beside her the familiar little machine with its array of blinking digital monitors. Beverly's arm raged as the blood pressure device tightened around it, wheezing as it was released. A thin, disposable thermometer was planted in her mouth, which she held in place without argument until the nurse extracted it. The nurse asked how she was feeling, but Beverly made no response, simply closing her eyes and rolling over slightly as if intent on sleeping. The wheels beneath the machine squeaked as the nurse took her leave, flicking the light off before shutting the door again. In the moments that followed, the full horror of the nightmare she had entered impressed itself upon Beverly's thoughts. The animal panic of being fettered and dragged away against her will cooled and coagulated into a deep, ponderous dread of being trapped in a place from which she could not possibly flee. She had seen the series of secured and fortified doors through which she had passed on her way to the ward, and it was painfully clear that she was a prisoner of these walls, and of the wills and whimsies of the doctors and her father, who was undoubtedly pleased to have her safely out of his sight. Kicking the sheets away, she got out of bed and went to the window, where she pulled the dark blue shade aside and peered through the bars. A brick corner overtook much of the view. Other than this, she could see an empty parking lot some 7 stories below, presided over by a single dingy street lamp and terminating at a tall wire fence, beyond which she could just barely discern the shapes of tombstones, overshaded by bobbing tree branches. On previous visits to St. Mary's Hospital, she had been amused by the ironic presence of a sprawling, many-acre Catholic cemetery that encircled the campus on 3 of its 4 sides. Now there was no humor in it, only a deepening of the dread and meanness she felt already. Beverly tried to console herself by thinking that this was not, after all, very different from the preparatory school from which she had come only that afternoon. True, the St. Teresa of Avila School for Girls had no bars in its windows, but that only made her internment there more humiliating, as she was a prisoner of her own fear and weakness. Once, stung by some reproach made by one of the sisters that taught there, Beverly had bolted out of the building and slipped through the gates, only to find herself miles from the city, alone on a roadside in her telltale gray skirt and dusky blue cardigan. She managed to stay away for more than an hour, wondering whether she should start walking in the direction of her father's house, some 15 miles distant. Her mind was tortured, though, by the thought of the trouble she would cause and the trouble she would be in, so she returned with her head hung, to accept with her reprimand and listen as her father was called. Later, in the shower, she had consoled herself with a few strokes of the razor, long and luxurious, across her upper arm. Here, there would be no bleeding. The purpose of this prison was to keep her from the only source of comfort and gratification she had found. In the light of the street lamp, she looked at the bulky bandages on her arms, covering the splendid marks of her life's most wonderful moments so far, the nearest to euphoria and complete escape she had ever come. She felt herself wanting to scream again, wild panic surging up in her once more as she began to rip and claw at the hard and strange-smelling gauze in which her arms were wrapped. After a few minutes of surprisingly arduous struggle, the bandages and cotton lay amassed and blood-soaked on the floor, while Beverly slid down to her knees and lost herself in fresh exaltation of her wounds. Many of them, having had hours in which to form scabs, were reopened when their binding was yanked away, and Beverly was thrilled anew to see them brimming with pretty springs of fresh blood. She sat, rocking with alternating sobs and laughter, until the pills she had been given made her fall over woozily so that she could barely find her way to the bed again. When she did, she curled herself up like a nautilus shell, wrapping herself in the covers and clutching the pillow fiercely with both arms, which throbbed and stung indescribably. In this way, she fell asleep. End of chapter 1. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Toman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 2. Beverly awoke to a room filled with sharp daylight, and the sound of a nurse at her door, accompanied by one of the squeaky-wheeled machines. She lay motionless and blinking for a few seconds, with spots of pain sprouting one after another in her limbs and along her spine, reminding her of the travail she had been through the previous evening with the doctor and the security guards. As the door edged open, Beverly arose and found that her arms could be separated from the fabric covering her pillow only with some effort, and that they left behind an impressive display of dried blood, which had saturated not only the pillowcase, but the bed sheets as well. Suddenly mortified, she thought to drape herself and her pillow in the covers, but the effort proved too late, and the nurse, who was new and unfamiliar, halted in the doorway with an expression of utmost alarm. Instantly, the nurse turned and ran out into the hallway, calling out for assistance. She returned a few moments later, with 2 others hurrying at her side, while Beverly lay huddled with the covers on her head. The covers were peeled away, and Beverly lay exposed to 3 nurses, who beset her simultaneously, demanding to know if she was conscious, and wrenching her arms up to scrutinize her wounds and daub them with sopping claws. Beverly screeched and writhed as the cold liquid was dragged across her seething wrists, soaking the sheets beneath her and streaking the length of her arms with pale red tracks. She protested loudly, saying, I'm okay, they're old, they're not new." The nurse's plastic gloves gripped her firmly, and Beverly's body was racked by chills and spasms of piercing anguish as a watery solution was replaced with one of alcohol. "Just stay still, dear," one of the nurses kept on saying. When the other 2 nurses were finished with their cleaning, the third told Beverly to come with her to the second bed, while the linens were stripped from the one on which she had lain and piled into bright orange bags marked Biohazard, along with the bandages that lay strewn at the foot of the window. Beverly sat silent and still while the third nurse dressed her arms in the same fashion as before. "Why did you take the bandages off?" the nurse asked. "I don't know," said Beverly. "I just didn't want them on anymore." "Were they uncomfortable? Is that the reason?" the nurse pressed. Yeah, I guess," said Beverly. The nurse wound new gauze around each of Beverly's arms, having her hold the cotton pads in place in the usual way. When she was finished, the nurse asked, "Well, how does that feel?" "Fine," said Beverly. "Are you completely sure?" Beverly nodded. "All right, then," said the nurse. "Just sit tight now, and we'll have a doctor come around and talk to you. Are you hungry, dear?" It now occurred to Beverly that she had eaten nothing since the previous afternoon, before the incident in the dormitory bathroom, and that her stomach felt altogether empty. She nodded again, mumbling, "I think so." "Well, breakfast starts in about 15 minutes, the nurse said. "We'll make sure you go over and get something right after you've talked to the doctor." When the nurse had left, Beverly sat looking at the naked mattress on the bed she had slept in the night before. Why couldn't they have just left the sheets the way they were, she wondered. Why did everyone make such a fuss about a little blood? "It's my blood," she found herself muttering inaudibly. "It's not theirs. It's nobody's but mine. I'll lose it if I want to lose it. I'll keep it if I want to keep it. And if I want to see it, if I want to taste it, if I want to feel it all over me, well, why shouldn't I? And if I die, who cares?" Beverly heard the door open behind her, and her name spoken softly, but she didn't turn. She stared ahead. She heard her name again, a man's voice, uncommonly sweet and gentle, like wind blown through a crystal chandelier. She turned now, only slightly, and in the corner of her eye she saw a white-faced young man, graceful and slender, beaming like an overexposed photograph. But when she heard her name the third time, the voice had changed. It was still that of a man, but a regular man, and when she turned around completely, she saw a round-shaped doctor in a white coat, with greying hair and a beard. Her face assumed a look of dire perplexity, for she was certain of what she had seen and heard the first time. She wondered if it was the pills or the hunger that was causing her to hallucinate. The man introduced himself as Dr. Martin. "I've heard you had an eventful night last night," he said. "I thought you might want to talk about it." Beverly resumed her original posture as Dr. Martin circled around the bed and sat in front of her, and somewhat to the left, on the denuded mattress. "Are you referring to the way in which I was strapped down and dragged here like an animal?" Beverly asked. "Or to the way in which I chose to sleep unencumbered by my bandages?" The doctor smiled meagerly. "You have a talent for euphemism, I see," he said. "I suppose I'm referring to all of it, or any part of it that interests you right now." "None of it interests me," said Beverly. "I'm not interested in being here. This is your choice, not mine. I'm a captive." "I saw in your case folder that you go to St. Teresa of Avila," said Dr. Martin. "That's a very good school, I hear. Do you miss the other girls there?" "Not especially," said Beverly. "And I'm a captive there, too. I can't seem to remember a time when I was given a choice about anything." "So you feel powerless, then, is that it?" said Dr. Martin, still smiling secretively. Beverly saw that she was being analyzed and made no reply. "All right, then," said Dr. Martin after a sigh. "We'll just have to get to that later. We'll be getting to know each other very well while you're here, Beverly, but it must be insisted with all urgency that you keep your bandages on until your arms are satisfactorily healed. For your safety and the safety of your fellow patients, it is an absolute indispensable precaution. Do you understand?" "What if I want to take a shower?" asked Beverly tartly. "We have plastic sleeves you can put over your arms and keep them from getting wet," said the doctor, "and every once in a while a nurse will come to monitor your healing and change the bandages as needed. You don't have to worry about a thing while you're here except relaxing and feeling better." "But I felt fine before I came," said Beverly. "In fact, I felt wonderful up until the ambulance arrived." Seeming to dismiss this statement, Dr. Martin looked at his watch. "Why, it's breakfast time," he said. "You must be starving, mustn't you?" "Where are my clothes?" Beverly demanded. "I can't go anywhere in this horrible paper gown." "I imagine the clothes you came in were fairly stained up," said the doctor. "If they can be salvaged, they'll probably be washed and brought up by this afternoon. Otherwise, your father will have to bring you something." "I'll wait until then," said Beverly, and she lay down on her bed, tugged at her gown till it was at a nearly decent length, and closed her eyes. "I'll send in someone with a tray," said Dr. Martin, "just this once." Then he pushed off the creaking mattress and stepped smartly from the room, leaving only silence behind him. End of chapter 2. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Toman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 3. Beverly looked contemptuously upon the breakfast that was placed upon her desk some 10 minutes later by a quick-moving nurse who said nothing but merely smiled limply and flitted away. Beverly was never asked what she wanted, but seemed to have been brought a hasty sampling of all that was put before her as yet unknown fellow inmates in the communal dining room. This consisted of a portion of cereal, a small cup of yogurt, a plain donut, 2 identically shaped cartons, one of which contained milk and the other orange juice. Though her stomach was a roiling void, Beverly could not overcome the agitation of her circumstance enough to eat. She put a piece of cereal in her mouth, chewed it, and swallowed with a look of unutterable revulsion. She opened the carton of orange juice, lifted its mouth to her lips, and set it down again without drinking, pushing the tray away. It was clearly useless. Her hunger was great, but her despondence was greater. Sitting down in the chair by the desk, she crossed one goose-flesh-covered leg over another, folded her arms over her stomach, and leaned deeply forward, so that her hair draped over her knees, hiding her face from the daylight. For some minutes she stayed like this, rocking mechanically to distract herself from her whining stomach and inexpressible stampeding thoughts. Finally, she snatched up a plastic spoon from the tray's long, ovoid compartment, tore the foil lid from the cup of the yogurt, and frantically fired several dollops of the pale, vanilla-flavored substance into her mouth, gulping it down before giving herself a chance to reject it. And the cup being thus half emptied, her mortified will rallied itself in protest again, and finding herself sickened, she hurled both cup and spoon down, cast the tray to the back of the desk, and resumed her former position, rocking now with redoubled fury. A soft, dolorous moan seeped from her lips, and her eyes, staring forward into the dark, swaying curtain of her hair, grew foggy with freshly rising tears. A sudden lucidity overtook her, and passing her bandaged wrist over her tear-covered face, she turned and looked again at the spoon she had just thrown down. With a look of queer deliberation, she picked it up again, turning it in her fingers intently, penetratingly. In one abrupt motion, she took it in both hands and snapped its concave head from its long stem. It divided cleanly, a smooth and harmless edge remaining at what was the utensil's natural point of weakness. With a little more effort, Beverly broke the stem again. This time, the rending was violent and unnatural, leaving behind one piece that was particularly jagged. Against this remnant she pressed her fingertip, and pressed so that it came ravishingly near to bursting through her skin. This was good enough. She smiled inwardly in a way that hardly touched her lips, carefully dropped the useless portion of the spoon into a partially open drawer, and clutched the treasured fragment to her breast, so that when she could feel its sharpness prodding her flesh. Then she hurtled out of her chair and went to bed, where she stuffed the stem under her mattress and, jumping on top, buried herself in the covers, shivering with anticipation, exultation, and fear. A while later, the nurse returned for the tray, and halted at finding its contents disturbed but unconsumed. "Are you sure that's all you want?" she called in the direction of the bed. "There's nothing else, until lunchtime." "I'm sure," Beverly said from under the sheets. "Are you all right under there?" asked the nurse. "Yes," said Beverly, "just a little headache." "I'll bring in some aspirin," said the nurse. Then she took up the tray and started out. Midway through the door, however, she stopped and turned around. Beverly's heart lurched. "Oh, good news," the nurse said. "It looks like you're about to get a roommate." Beverly peeked through the covers. "Roommate?" she said. "Yes, indeed," said the nurse. "Another little cutter like you. Her parents are just signing her over now, and as far as I know, this is the only room with a bed for a girl." Beverly stared at the nurse, but said nothing, until at last the nurse left with a shrug and the door hissed shut at her heels. Beverly lay on her back with the covers over her shoulders, examining the featureless ceiling as if it were the screen across which her chaotic thoughts blinked. Most of all, she lingered upon that phrase which had just been so idly spoken by the nurse. "Another little cutter like you." So, Beverly had a species. She had been identified and marked by the society of doctors and nurses, holy fathers and helpless fathers, all the wardens and gatekeepers of her cold, motionless, somehow pre-Galilean island of a world where she had only ever been able to escape from one jail cell into another. Of all the indistinguishable moping daughters of so-called privilege that ground out their days and nights with her at St. Teresa of Avila's Academy for Girls, finding their drug in the opened vein, living in shame and dying in silence, all Beverly was the one who lost control, the one who went too far, the one who got caught. From miles away she could still hear the furious whispers of the other girls, who would all be made to suffer without release for Beverly's moment of ecstasy, Beverly's moment of arrogance. Their arms and legs would be scrutinized and found unmistakably marred. Their coveted razors would be gathered up and carried away, and the hair on their legs and under their arms would grow long and dark, and they would all fester and fume and lay sordid conspiracies for her return, if she was ever allowed to return. A ravening brood of self-loving self-haters, all slaves to slander and jealousy and unspeakable restlessness, their eyes fixed icily on their hours of release to Harvard, Oxford, Yale, Berkeley, wherever, stalking haughty and hate-filled past statues of placid and sorrowing saints. They would flay her alive with their eyes and their tongues if she ever came back. She would hang in unreachable desolation upon a cross of their unanimous contempt. She thought of her father, the man with 3 offices, 2 houses he never slept in, hotel concierges who knew him as Stan and brought their girlfriend engagement rings with his tips, secretaries who didn't recognize Beverly's voice when she called for him and said, "Daughter," as if it were something libelous and profane. How tragic it was that he would never want her back now, as if there were anything for her to come back to, more than watching him take conference calls on his private yacht while she balanced like an acrobat on the tipping bow, daring herself to step unnoticed into the undertow. She could stay there forever, a nameless wraith on the hospital's 7th floor, or get shuttled to an asylum for the unfixable, where a 6-figure bill at the end of the year is all she'd be to anyone, forever, as always. She wanted to cry, but the jagged crevice in her heart had been dry for years, engulfing her like a canyon and echoing her unuttered screams until they filled her head like a pestilence of crows. Again she felt the urgent desire to free her arms of their sepulchral wrappings and let her blood breathe, let it effervesce cavortingly down the silky pathways of her skin. Her arm, which had been laying across her stomach, dropped to the side of the bed, and her hand toyed with the edge of the mattress. Beneath this, a few inches from her fingertip, was the broken plastic stem upon which all her hopes for any future joy were placed. There was a sound at the door's latch, and Beverly drew back her arm, rising to sit erect. A nurse jetted her head in, saying, "Is everyone decent in here?" Beverly drew her covers up until they nearly breached her shoulders, hoping to conceal as much as she could of her obscenely printed hospital gown. "No," she muttered grimly. But it went unnoticed by the nurse, who opened the door fully and stood aside to admit a slender, almost shockingly petite girl, about Beverly's age, or perhaps a year younger. Beverly and the girl made eye contact instantaneously, but the girl's look was so sharp and unwavering that after a few moments, in which she swore she could see the girl's eyes dilate, even from a distance of 7 feet, Beverly had no choice but to turn her eyes away and resume in an attitude of gloomy disinterest. "Jennifer, this is Beverly, who just arrived yesterday," said the nurse. "I imagine the 2 of you will find you have 1 or 2 things in common. We're just sending someone in to put new linens on the other bed." "What happened to the linens that were on it before?" asked Jennifer, still peering at Beverly. Beverly smirked and looked at the protruding shape of her folded arms beneath the covers. "I got my blood all over them," she said. Looking very much aghast, the nurse said, "It was nothing to worry about, really, and it won't be repeated." "Why should I worry?" said Jennifer opaquely. "I enjoy a little blood in my bed sheets." At this, Beverly laughed abruptly. She went silent, however, when she perceived that Jennifer's expression was still stony and serious, and that her eyes had still not moved from when they first landed upon her new roommate. For a moment the room was possessed by the most unsettling quiescence, as Beverly found herself answering Jennifer's gaze transfixedly, plumbing for some hint of humanity, and both horrified and spellbound at finding none. Suddenly, Jennifer snapped her stare away from Beverly and turned it up at the nurse, who, while not being much more than 5'6" by Beverly's estimation, still loomed enormously over the compact newcomer. "I do wish you'd leave us alone now," Jennifer said. The nurse, whose complexion had been quite pink before, now turned ashen. She began to pronounce something. "Well, But her speech seemed to fail her, and growing quite rigid, she stalked from the room, leaving Jennifer alone in the rectangular light of the threshold. Jennifer stepped forward, and the door swept closed behind her back, halting upon its hinges a few inches from the jamb, then slowly sighing the rest of the way before shutting with a terminal click. Beverly sank a little further beneath her covers, unable to conceal her unease. As Jennifer drew purposefully to the side of the bed, she began to speak in a low, intimate tone, saying, "He's chosen so nicely, hasn't he? So prettily." "What?" Beverly said, but Jennifer had already extended her small hand, revealing a wrist bandaged soundly in white, and had begun to stroke Beverly's somewhat matted brown hair, which was due for washing. Beverly squeaked in bewildered fright, and, impeded by the covers tucked around her, began to kick them away. Jennifer's eyes waxed large, showing some recognizable kind of expression for the first time since she had made her appearance at the doorway. "It's going to rain tonight," she exclaimed breathlessly. "Do you know what that means?" "What are you talking about?" Beverly cried, tearing free of the sheets and tumbling to the floor. She scrambled to her feet and ran to the corner of the room, where she backed herself in, wide-eyed. In that instant, the door opened again, and Dr. Martin stepped unhesitatingly in, carrying a large plastic shopping bag in his hand, and followed by a nurse with her arms full of bed-sheets. He stopped and wondered for a moment at the position of the two girls, Jennifer with one knee up on Beverly's disordered bed, and Beverly braced against the edge of the plain, white-painted bureau, looking desperate. "Good news, Beverly," the doctor said, holding forth the bag. "Your father sent clothes for you, and it looks like they're new." As if afraid of rousing Jennifer to further excitation, Beverly spoke softly and evenly. "You can't make me stay here with her." "Why not?" said Dr. Martin. "You two will be perfect roommates. And besides, there's frankly no other place to put you." Jennifer, appearing to smile, perched herself on the edge of the bed, in which Beverly had until lately lain, so that the toes of her shoes barely scraped the floor. "I'm sorry," she said, as monotone as ever. "I'm afraid I startled Beverly with my unusual sense of humor." "So I see," said Dr. Martin. "Your unusual sense of humor is already legendary around here. It certainly left an impression on Nurse McMahon." The nurse cleared her throat audibly as she applied herself to covering the bed. "We're going to have an all-ward counseling session in the recreation room at 11 o'clock, Dr. Martin resumed. That's just about an hour from now. You should have plenty of time to shower and get dressed, Beverly, as well as to get to know your endearing new companion. I'm sure the rest of the ward is looking forward to meeting our latest pair of mystery girls." The finishing fold was put on the bed, and the nurse left without speaking a word. Dr. Martin, putting the fancy-looking black bag on the floor at the foot of Beverly's bed, smiled obsequiously and followed her out. Beverly looked blackly at Jennifer, whose manner, sitting at the bed's edge with her hands folded on her lap, was almost dainty, eerily porcelain. She had, at least, discarded her chilling approximation of a smile. Edging out of her corner, Beverly scuttled over to the shopping bag, scooped it up, and made a straight line for the bathroom, where she slammed the door shut and bolted it loudly. After staring at the door for the best part of a minute, Jennifer pushed off the bed and walked serenely to the window, where she lifted the shade aside. She peered first in the direction of the graveyard, where marble monuments shaped like cisterns and crosses leaned at opposing angles, vanishing over a hill and behind a screen of dangling willow branches. Then she turned her unblinking eyes up to the sky, which grew fat with layers of lugubrious, swiftly gathering clouds. Putting her right thumb to her lips, she placed it in between her upper and lower canine teeth, and bit down with such exertion that her shoulders came to tremble. Finally she extracted her thumb, and seeing that she had procured a slight issuance of blood, brought it up to the window pane. There, in faint scarlet streaks, she wrote, "Rain tonight," and a gust blew up and disturbed the willows. End of chapter 3. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis-Drummond. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 4. Sucking placidly on her punctured thumb, Jennifer let the curtain fall back over her curious graffiti and went to her newly restored bed, the one closest to the window. She sat cross-legged and straight-backed upon it, watching the bathroom door, from behind which could be heard the sounds of Beverly in the shower, the pulsing of the water growing higher and lower in pitch as she submerged her head first, then her shoulders, and on down, then the same again, evidently in no hurry to emerge. After 10 minutes, the water was turned off, diminishing with the squeaking of one knob and ceasing altogether with the tightening of the second. And then there was the sliding of the shower door, bare, wet feet upon the hard floor, the rustling of a coarse, over-bleached towel, and finally the sounds of things being withdrawn from the plastic bag. For a while, after this maelstrom of perceptible activity, there was no sound at all. With nothing to listen to, Jennifer indulged in an elongated sigh and fell on her back across the bed. So tiny was her form, however, that even with her lying lengthwise over a twin bed, her dark-tracked blonde hair just finding its way over one side, the white soles of her black cloth sneakers could dangle freely without touching the ground. She spread her matchstick arms as if she were Christ receiving his nails, a streak of white bandaging showing brightly around each wrist, albeit far less than that which overtook Beverly's and came right to the verge of her elbows. 25 minutes after she had disappeared into the bathroom, Beverly came demurely out with her hair bound up in a towel. Jennifer sprang up to look at her, and Beverly met her gaze diffidently, although managing not to appear as terror-struck as before. She felt a little more in control of her condition now that she was no longer shivering from shame and exposure in the parchment-like hospital gown. The clothes her father had sent were indeed entirely new and undoubtedly picked out by one of his secretaries, whose vassalage to him really knew no limits. The boutique from which they were purchased was to be found only in Manhattan. They were heavy with the scent of distinction and excess. Though indisputably costly, the ensemble was otherwise fairly plain. A close-fitting black cotton turtleneck shirt with thoughtfully long sleeves, grey denim pants, a hooded black sweater with a zipper on the front, and black slip-on shoes worn over bare feet. Beverly grimaced slightly when she noted how the funereal hues of her own wardrobe matched those worn by her deranged roommate, whose skin-tight tube pants were black with grey pinstripes, and her t-shirt black with a stylized silver lightning bolt in the center of the breast. Furthermore, as if to test the boundaries of absurdity, Jennifer's denim jacket with its black hood stitched in behind the collar was the same shade of grey as Beverly's pants. "Well, look, it's my preppy big sister," said Jennifer drolly, as if plucking Beverly's thoughts from the air. "If your bandages didn't give you away, your fashion sense would have." Feeling at ease enough in her new clothes to walk about for the first time, Beverly went from place to place in the room, affecting a curiosity that was betrayed by the place's complete absence of decoration or character. "I don't know what you mean," she said, opening the drawer with the remnants of the spoon in it, then hurriedly slamming it closed again. "I didn't choose these clothes. I'm frankly not sure who did." "Nothing ever happens by accident," said Jennifer. "What exactly are you going for with all of these mysterious statements of yours?" said Beverly, taking the chair by the desk and facing her roommate squarely. "Are you trying to frighten me?" "Well," said Jennifer, "you're frightened." "I'll admit to being startled," said Beverly. "You weren't making any sense. You're still not. You've looked like you wanted to eat me since the nurse brought you in. I don't know, maybe this is just the way you're used to acting. Maybe that's why they put you in here." Jennifer held out her wrists. "These are why they put me in here," she said. "Not much compared to yours, of course, but they got me where I wanted to be." "What? Dead?" Beverly laughed coldly. "Sorry, but you've missed your mark. The morgue's a few floors down from here." Jennifer glared hardly at Beverly, her lips tightening. "Nobody ever really wants to die," she said. "People want freedom. From fear, from pain, from boredom. You could have killed yourself in an instant if simple obliteration was what you were after. But you didn't opt for death because you didn't believe in paradise. Or rather, you're afraid of what it would look like, white and meaningless and inescapable like this hospital. So you cut yourself open until pain, fear, and boredom were all forgotten, all lost in the beauty of the blood flow, the drama of seeing yourself dying from the outside, which is so much more exciting than feeling yourself dying on the inside, isn't it?" "You've really thought this thing through, haven't you?" said Beverly. "How many times have you landed yourself in here, anyway?" "Only this once," Jennifer answered. "It'll be enough." "There you go again," said Beverly. "You can't just say these things without an explanation. What do you mean it'll be enough? Enough for what?" "Enough to prove myself," Jennifer uttered. Her eyes flared suddenly, and then plummeted downward, as if from some inner self-reproach. "To whom?" asked Beverly. Don't worry about it, Jennifer sniffed. A look of pity overswept Beverly's countenance, and she said, "Oh, good God, you slit your wrists over a boy." "You can't understand yet," said Jennifer, lying down again with her hands at her sides, "but you will soon. It's going to rain tonight." "I really wish I knew what the hell you mean when you say that," muttered Beverly. She left the chair and went to her own bed, where she too lay down. "Anyway, you must be a public school kid, right? At least you're allowed to meet boys where you come from. The only men I ever see are hiding behind the screen of a confessional booth." Jennifer lay still, making no response. As she settled back into her pillow, Beverly found her thoughts escaping to Adrian, a mysterious friend with whom she frequently corresponded, who lived in a nearby section of town. Beverly had never met him in person. With a decade's difference between them, the impropriety of it would have seemed monstrous to an onlooker, but he wrote the most beautiful, thoughtful letters and always put the name Adriana on the envelopes so they would pass unmolested through the school's punctilious censors. "Adrian will worry himself to death if he doesn't hear from me while I'm in here," Beverly thought. "I'll die of loneliness if I can't get letters from him." Beverly's reverie was broken off by the sound of someone approaching the room's door. A nurse pushed it open enough to let her head in and said, 11 o'clock, girls. Time for the all-ward." Rolling off their beds, Beverly and Jennifer followed the nurse out into the nauseating light of the hallway, and they walked together towards the end, where the other patients could be seen sluggishly collecting by an open door, then drifting through it one by one. The door was heavy, with a little window on it that Beverly would have had to stand on her toes to see through, and its green paint was marked with a multitude of scuffs and scratches that bared the dull silver metal beneath. A brown plastic sign with white letters was posted to it, reading, "Recreation Room." The nurse gestured for them to enter, which they did slowly on the heels of a shriveled and misshapen old man who leaned gasping and cursing under his breath upon a four-legged walker. Beverly was incredulous at the number of patients sharing the ward with her. The 2 long couches and 4 armchairs of which the room was furnished were already filled, their occupants slumping and twitching. For some of the rest, there was an ill-matched assemblage of metal folding chairs, as well as a few ugly orange and green chairs made of molded plastic. All of these had been claimed, however, and one patient was obliged to relinquish his to the wheezing man who preceded Beverly and Jennifer. The person who had been sitting there first did this tempestuously, throwing his hands up in a show of profound irritation. He went to lean against a wall with his arms crossed, scowling like a child. Accustomed already to feeling like a misfit among the girls of the academy, who were all alike in sex, age, wealth, and external appearance, and all but the most native traits, which could not be covered by a uniform, amidst this horrifying menagerie of youthful and aged, tidy and untidy, civilized and coarse, all differently clothed and subscribing to their own standards of propriety, Beverly felt both overwhelmed and hopelessly out of place. Only when the room had settled and she and Jennifer had found a place to recline along the ledge of a wide window did Beverly begin to discern a few more of her own kind. Teenage girls and morose young women glowering discreetly from the corners, their sleeves pulled tight and clutched in their palms, their grim faces half obscured by veils of variously dyed hair and hoods drawn up to their fullest. As the doctor, at the head of the room, rambled and gesticulated under a chalkboard scrawled with the words, "Emotional barriers to a healthy self-image," Beverly mused silently that the 6 other girls she could find mixed into the human stew that filled the room might have been hatched from the same clutch as Jennifer. They seemed to have conceded to the same oppressions that beset her classmates by assigning themselves a uniform of sorts, when an ostensibly free society demanded none of them. She returned to a memory enshrined in the deep-set alcove of her mind of when she was tiny, and her mother was as well as she could be, and they and her father went to a zoo. She recalled very faintly her mother's strange, lifeless smile and vacant eyes, peering up at the little tropical birds that filled the branches of an aviary. She thought, "We're such excellent zookeepers that we can't even imagine ourselves out of cages." By some preternatural commingling of thought and happenstance, it was at that moment that the lecturing doctor said, "It's not unusual or even wrong to sometimes feel as if the whole world is set against you, and you're backed up against a wall with nowhere to turn." Beverly, who had been watching one of the other girls chew her nails into useless stubs, shifted her eyes to the front of the room, where the doctor paced in front of his blackboard, disappearing at intervals behind the heads of his audience. He was a dark-skinned man in his early 40s, with a circular face and a well-controlled accent, suggestive of Indian or Pakistani provenance. But as he emerged again from behind the jungle of assembled bodies, Beverly clearly saw a young man with skin as white as a polished pearl who said, "You feel as if you're all alone, locked up with an enemy, because not even you can love yourself." His eyes divided the multitude and found Beverly's, like an arrow piercing flesh. The doctor stepped aside again and reappeared in his old shape, with his old accent, discoursing on the power of internal and external perceptions. Beverly felt sick. She clenched her stomach beneath her arms and bent over a little, looking at her feet, and noticed that Jennifer, who had slipped off the ledge to sit lotus-style upon the floor, was staring straight up, her expression blank and inscrutable. As she had been that morning, Beverly was famished, without an appetite for any food she could think of. She had ignored the form that the nurse had left with her that morning, on which she was supposed to make her selection for lunch. How much easier it would be, she thought, if they simply forgot to feed her, if they let her waste away. Lunch hour would follow the all-ward session, and she made it an object to learn more about the other girls in the ward, to watch what they did and discover with what causes they had been committed. They must be cutters, she thought. All of them wear long sleeves. End of chapter 4. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Truman. Chapter 5. When the doctor has reached an end to his sermon and had found himself cooped in a triangle of over-earnest middle-aged women, chattering to him of symptoms and resolutions, the room began to empty of its other humiliated-looking occupants, who formed a mass at the door that leaked body by body out into the hall. "Good, good," was all Beverly could hear the doctor saying in his musical accent, taking small steps toward the exit, with the human triangle inching in formation right with him. Beverly remained as she was in her corner haven, watching from beneath a bowed head for the departure of the long-sleeved girls, and waiting for Jennifer to rise from the position she had taken near her feet. From the opposite side of the room, the doctor and his floating phalanx edged jerkily to the threshold and was finally divided. Still the girls had not moved. They stuck to their places like effigies in a Greek garden, some looking at Beverly, some looking at the ground, all silent as stones. A sly, solicitous smile was posted on Jennifer's pixie-like face. Alone in the midst of these objects of inquiry, Beverly felt afraid. Finding it impossible to ignore Jennifer's stare, she parroted the smile back at her roommate. After a few moments of this, she broke away, whispered a mystified "Okay" to herself, and started briskly for the door. Instantly, Jennifer and the rest of the girls sprang from their places, but rather than barring her way, they assembled his body behind her and began to follow her out. As Beverly took another step forward, an idea took form in her imagination. The girls would commence to taunt her and shove her from behind, as any group of school-age ruffians might, as they had in Beverly's past when she had begun her tenure at some new private school or another. She built a little barrier around her heart in preparation for the treatment, but found it unnecessary when, rather than bearing her down, the girls simply trailed a few respectful measures behind her, their hands in their pockets, looking eerily passive. As she reached the door, Beverly's trepidation was pushed aside by a feeling of embarrassment. She pulled the door open and then stood against it, hoping that the gaggle would pass politely through. She marveled instead to find them standing expectantly in place. Finally, Jennifer broke rank and put her hands above those of Beverly on the door, still looking horrifyingly sweet, motioning for her to pass through before the rest. Beverly threw her hands up with a growl and fled back into the room, bounding in one of the ragged armchairs, where she curled her legs up protectively and sat with a turbulent scowl. Jennifer discarded her smile and let the door swing closed again, while the girls all turned in Beverly's direction, their faces overcast and stolid, their slouching postures affecting a diffuse adolescent malaise. "Is something the matter?" Jennifer asked, leaning her shoulder against the doorpost. Only your extraordinarily juvenile idea of an initiation ritual, Beverly responded. I haven't even been introduced to anybody in your little posse yet, and I'm already being made the subject of torment and harassment by them. Isn't it bad enough that I've been locked up here against my will? Why on earth are you going through such trouble to make me feel uncomfortable? Against your will, said Jennifer. Nobody's here against her will, least of all you. The ride you're getting is the ride you paid for in blood. How can you go on acting like everything's an accident when you're the cause of it all? As usual, I have no idea what you're talking about, Jennifer, said Beverly. What am I the cause of? Jennifer laughed. You make the rain to fall on good and evil alike, she said. Turning her stare up upon the taciturn group of girls, Beverly asked, Am I the only one here who isn't totally out of her mind? She remembered her surroundings, however, and glanced away, biting her lip. Still, she wondered whether it was a typical effect of the public school system that it made girls her age as pliable, meek, and herd-minded as this identical-looking clique that seemed to be held so powerfully under the petite Jennifer's inexplicable influence. Very suddenly, Jennifer's attention was diverted to the large window under which she and Beverly had stood during the doctor's lecture a few minutes before. Nearly leaping on her short, spriggish legs, she was there in a few strides, staring with an attitude of rapture at the stuttering appearance of little rain droplets on the face of the glass. With her cheek against the pane, she peered upward at the sky, which, since morning, had grown steadily gloomier, and was now an unbroken field of thickening grey. The little clutch of girls gathered loosely around her, and Beverly thought she detected a signal of apprehension in their soundless steps. They too looked at the window, not out of it, but at it, and their eyes were like glazed clay, shiny and inanimate. Ha! Jennifer cried. I told you! I knew it was coming! Of course I knew! My God, thought Beverly. Surely she can't be ranting only about the rain. Unable to repress her curiosity, she left her chair and joined the others at the window, where she pressed close to the glass and passed her scrutinizing gaze over everything that could be seen. There was nothing but the featureless walls of the hospital, and a small section of the parking lot, and a careless late autumn drizzle casting its black dots here and there. Okay, so it's raining, she said. You probably caught a weather forecast on the TV when you were waiting to be dragged up here this morning. As she said this, a thought occurred to Beverly, and she turned to Jennifer and asked, You have only been here since this morning, haven't you? Yes, said Jennifer, pulling herself up to recline with cat-like languor upon the broadly protruding windowsill. There she sat with a grace that was almost obscene, her weight on one buttock, her legs straight out and crossed before her. So how long have all of you been here? Beverly asked the long-sleeved girls. She somewhat expected them to stare mutely at her, waiting for Jennifer to make a response on their behalf, as seemed to be their habit. Beverly was startled when answers emerged from their own lips, most of which were pierced. I've been here a week, said one. A month, said another. Since September, I think, said another, whose face was especially sallow. All right, said Beverly, so if Jennifer here is the new girl, newer even than I am, since I came here last night, then why is it that all of you are following her around? It's the creepiest thing I've ever seen. It's like you have this follow-the-leader radar sense or something for the first person that shows up who's crazier than you are. To her consternation, the girls actually began to smile subversively at each other, with one flinging a hand over her own mouth in an effort to restrain a spasm of giggles. Isn't it a lot to assume, said Jennifer, that none of us have ever met before being committed to the ward? She watched a look of profound puzzlement take shape upon Beverly's features before adding, But then you are a private school girl, aren't you? Beverly's eyes grew broad as she realized the simplicity of the answer she had overlooked. You all go to the same school, don't you? That's where you know each other from. Brilliant, Jennifer smirked, but the solution to one riddle only makes way for another. Your real question should be, how did we all end up here? Beverly looked the girls over coldly and shrugged. Well, I doubt it's a coincidence, she said. I assume that you're the weak-willed victims of some unfortunate trend. One of you was thrown in here first, and the rest of you decided it was a place to be. Yet another game of monkey see, monkey do. Suddenly Jennifer's expression fell quite serious, and she said, "If one soldier goes to fight in the foxholes, the rest don't just sit around waiting for her to come back. No, they go and they find her and they jump in the same trench she's in." She uncrossed her legs and dropped back to the floor, stepping past Beverly to enter her companion's midst, where she placed her hand on the arm of the sallow-faced girl. "It was Krista who came here first, about 6 weeks ago, dragged away like an animal from the school counselor's office. We waited a week, and when it was clear that her release wasn't forthcoming, I sent Michelle in after her. In another week, it was Alyssa, then Brenda, then Katie. Finally, in the 6th week, this morning in fact, I arranged to come last of all. Of course," she added, a little tartly, "it didn't take long for me to understand what we've come here for, the privilege for which we've all been chosen." Beverly looked over the faces of Jennifer and her companions, no longer trying to suppress her perplexity and frighten her expression. "What privilege is that?" she asked. Before Jennifer could utter a response, the crowd of girls swung around at the sound of the door being opened by one of the nurses. "Ah, there you all are," she said. "We were wondering when you'd decide to come and join us for lunch." Startled by the conspiratorial aspect of the group and by the distress shown by Beverly, she asked, "Is everything all right?" "Of course," said Jennifer. "We were just speculating about the weather." As the girls broke from their places by the window and began to shuffle towards the door, with Beverly taking the last place in the procession, the nurse peered across the room at the window and the pallid light of the afternoon, bestrewn with quickening droplets. "Yuck," she grumbled. "Looks like rain." In the dining room, the girls took the trays assigned to them and dispersed to various corners, renewing the strange masquerade they had performed at the lecture before of pretending to have nothing to do with each other. Having neglected her order from that morning, Beverly uncovered her tray and saw that she had been issued a hamburger, torched to blackness, and laid open on a half bun, with lettuce and tomato on one side of it and a small heap of French-cut potatoes on the other. Beverly had been an austere vegetarian since childhood, when she had read Charlotte's Web, and had been chastened by the consideration that there is no natural reason why a conscious animal born among humans ought to be regarded as food if unconscious plants could be cultivated to serve the same purpose. The smell of the burnt beef made her queasy, so she laid the other half of the bun delicately over it, as if she were covering the face of some stranger who had seized and expired in the open street, and called out faintly to those around her, "Does anyone here want a hamburger?" Nearly every head turned, but it was a very large and badly kept woman, who might plausibly have been any age above 30 and beneath 60, who reached her first, and with her hand already upon the mournful item, asked, You really ain't gonna eat it, honey?" "No, please take it," Beverly said, and was relieved of the thing instantly. Before she could move away, though, the fat woman returned and asked, "Got any ketchup?" "Oh, yes," Beverly responded, indicating with her eyes that there were 2 packets in the topmost left compartment of her tray, which the woman snatched away, rasping, "God bless you, dear." The dining room was rather small, but surprisingly quiet, filled mainly with the sounds of mastication and cups being raised and set down. Beverly was beginning to notice that the residents of Ward 3 had little to say to each other, and seemed universally disinclined to form any bond or acquaintance with those who shared the floor. One old man had been complaining loudly since Beverly arrived in the room, but what he said was mostly unintelligible, and as no one was sitting close to him, he seemed to have no intended audience. He had paused his harangue for a moment when one of Jennifer's clan, the one named Katie, had passed him in search of an unoccupied corner to crouch in, and he had given her a long, hollow smile, which only made her turn her head disdainfully and pick up her steps. The old man rebuked Katie's unfriendliness with a futile swipe of his stubby hand, then returned to his solitary litany of curses and moans. After a minute or two of searching the room and feeling very crowded in by the speechless and glowering inmates who stood and sat joylessly about her, Beverly found a vacant chair by the girl whom Jennifer had called Alyssa, the one who had been third in coming. "Nobody's sitting here, right?" asked Beverly, having already set her tray down on the table. A barely discernible shake of the girl's blonde and black-streaked head was all the answer she received, so she drew the chair out just far enough to slip into it, and sat uneasily for a moment, wondering if Alyssa was looking at her through her wedge-shaped visor of hanging bangs, or whether she was concentrating upon her own tray, still full of untouched helpings. Alyssa's hands were in her lap. Since agitation had prevented her from eating breakfast, Beverly was now undeniably hungry, and her sense of terror and desperation had been smoothed by an overlying complacence, the relative serenity of one whose capacity for astonishment had been too quickly overspent. Before beginning to nibble at a leaf of lettuce which had been mercifully set apart from the cooked carcass now resigned to the fat woman's bowels, Beverly bowed her head and made a hasty motion across her breast. When the lettuce had been half consumed, Beverly looked over and saw that Alyssa was watching her, and that her lips bore the evidence of some faint and unspoken amusement. Beverly locked eyes with her for a number of seconds and lowered the roughage from where it had been held before her mouth. "Yes," she said to Alyssa, with an acerbity well disguised. "May I help you?" "Did you just cross yourself?" Alyssa asked in a low voice. Well, yes, I may have," said Beverly. "It's something they make us do before every meal at Catholic school. No one eats who hasn't blessed the meal first. I've been doing it for so long, it's like an unconscious movement." "Oh," said Alyssa, and she lowered her eyes again. Tantalized by this new opportunity at normal conversation, Beverly searched for something else to say, moving on, meanwhile, to a slice of tomato that lay with the lettuce. It was a fat little slice, and Beverly had to dab her chin with her finger to keep the juices from running off. Alyssa apparently saw this and again began to smile, an expression that would have been indiscernible if it were not preceded by a very noticeable pout. Seeing that Alyssa had been given the same meal as she, and that it had been utterly ignored by the big-eyed and emaciated girl, Beverly asked, "Are you a vegetarian too?" "No," said Alyssa. "I love meat, but I like it done rare. This hamburger is burnt beyond usefulness. It's like eating a lump of charcoal." "Well," said Beverly, "the tomatoes are very nice." Alyssa stuck her tongue out, and Beverly saw that it was pierced with a small metal stub. "Blah," she said. "I never got into vegetables. I'm a strict carnivore." "Come again," said Beverly. "Carnivore. I subsist on a diet of meat and chocolate," Alyssa said. "Good God," said Beverly. "You manage to stay awfully skinny, if you don't mind me saying so, for somebody with a diet like that." "You think I'm skinny?" said Alyssa, betraying a hint of brightness. "Thank you." "No problem," said Beverly. A long slice intervened before she picked up a cold French fry and asked, "So, if this gang of yours, with Jennifer and the others, does it have a name?" "Gang?" said Alyssa. "We're not a gang. We're just a bunch of freaks that the rest of the school stays away from, so we sort of stick together naturally. We have a few common interests." Beverly raised her brow keenly. "Such as?" she said. "Well, cutting, for one," said Alyssa. "I mean, a lot of girls cut these days, but they don't advertise the fact. We're the only ones that are really serious about it, like as a legitimate form of expression, you know?" And her voice dropped, as if imparting something shameful. "We all like poetry." "Poetry?" said Beverly. "I like poetry. Emily Dickinson, Sylvia Plath, John Keats, Edgar Allan Poe. Those are my favorites." Yeah, I've read Little Poe," said Alyssa. "The Raven, Lenore, those are fun. Not much of the others you mentioned. The poet that we all like, you probably haven't heard of. He's like our poet." "You might be surprised," said Beverly. "What's his name?" "Forget it," Alyssa said, no longer looking at Beverly. "I'm sure you've never heard of him. His book isn't something you just read casually, you know. I can tell by looking at you that you haven't read him." "Come on," said Beverly. "I'm really curious now. Just tell me his name. I'll look him up as soon as I get out of here." "Forget it," snapped Alyssa. "You wouldn't find him. I just forget I mentioned it. I'll see you later." She picked up her tray, returned its cover, and tossed it on the pile being formed by the others, residents of the ward, as they made a line out the dining room door. "God," said Beverly beneath her breath, flicking her French fry away and standing up. "Whatever?" End of chapter 5. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Toman. Read by the author. The Blood Room, Chapter 6. The hushed mass that assembled in the threshold once Beverly had taken her place in it could be seen to form a right-angled queue that quite clearly extended to the reception desk, where afternoon medications were being dispensed. The expectation seemed to be that lunch was pursued by a period of relaxation, as if there were any exertions from which to recover. The slowly advancing line of slipper and stocking-shod patients was now and then broken by somebody whose quarters lay on the other side of it. Following the system of dissociation that had been their custom whenever persons outside their clique, excepting Beverly, were present, the long-sleeved girls took their places throughout the line and stood with their cotton hoods pulled tautly over their heads, crossing their arms as if accosted by a cold wind. It happened that one of the girls, some 5 bodies ahead of Beverly, turned her back so that it faced Beverly directly, and was unobstructed by anybody in between. For the first time, Beverly noticed that on the girl's frayed and faded denim jacket was a large and obvious patch, having the appearance of something handmade. The patch was cut in the shape of a white heart, trimmed in dark red, and containing within its bounds 4 jagged red stripes laid parallel to one another, with a 5th stripe striking diagonally across them, so that altogether they made a crude, sanguine-colored tally, such as one would draw when counting by denominations of 5. It was a curious symbol, Beverly thought, and she could only conjecture that it held some particular and intimate meaning to the girl. Or else it was some item drawn from popular culture of which her relative isolation and St. Teresa of Avila had kept Beverly ignorant. The way they seemed to be held in domination under Jennifer's implausible authority, Beverly could hardly imagine that any of the girls possessed much individual creative power or impulse, regardless of Alyssa's insistence that there was born between them no formal bond of confederacy. Nearing the nurse's counter, Beverly observed the girl with the heart on her back taking her cupfuls of water and unseen pills without waiting for the dispenser's urging, tip them one after another down her throat. Leaving the empty cups on the desk, she turned around and walked somberly back down the hall toward her room. Beverly forgot herself and stared at her as she passed by, meeting the girl's sideways glance eye to eye. The look communicated nothing definite. It was neither hostile nor friendly, and her lips were shut tightly in a way that seemed to purposely defy interpretation. Her countenance was as cryptic as the symbol that blared red and white behind her. Beverly herself arrived before the nurse a moment later, and was instantly presented with a cup containing the same 3 pills she had been given upon her arrival the previous night. She paused and looked down at them mistrustfully. "Go ahead," said the nurse. "There's still a line behind you." "Isn't one of these for sleeping?" Beverly asked. "Why should I have to take a sleeping pill in the middle of the afternoon? I want to stay awake." The nurse's hand drew up into a little claw, which she tapped almost imperceptibly on the countertop. "There's nothing in there that's going to hurt you, young lady," she said. "It's just to help you relax." "But there are 3 pills here," Beverly continued. "Are they all relaxation pills?" "Yes," the nurse grimaced. "They are all relaxation pills." "Can't I just take one of them?" Beverly asked. "Won't that relax me enough?" "Young lady," said the nurse, whose jovial plumpness and tiny spectacles seemed to conceal the spirit of a despot, "there will be time and a place for discussing the medications and dosages prescribed for you with a doctor. You may not appreciate the services we provide for you here, but let me assure you that there are persons standing in line behind you who consider their midday medications quite indispensable. Now, if you please." Beverly looked over and saw, as the nurse suggested, evidence of gathering impatience in those still waiting, who were either sincerely in need of the sedation being administered, or were merely tired of idling the minutes away in the noxiously lit hall. None of them made any vocal complaint, but they all glared at Beverly with expressions of sullen displeasure. Beverly frowned back at them, and then turned the frown on the intractable nurse before closing her eyes and choking down the contents of both cups. A victorious sliver of a smile darted across the nurse's broad face, in defiance of which Beverly turned smartly around and repaired indignantly to her room. The door was partly open, and as she passed through, she found Jennifer already upon the far bed, sitting upright in attention and facing the window nearby, a bleary-edged shadow against its grey light. "Isn't that my bed?" said Beverly, her voice still bowed with perturbation from her last encounter with the over-officious nurse. Jennifer turned only a little so that her profile lay soft and flat against the glare breaking through the shades. She looked across her shoulder at Beverly in a way that was almost disconcertingly feminine. "Does anything belong to anybody in here?" Jennifer asked somberly. Jennifer's tone and attitude was so pacific that Beverly assumed her to be already subdued by the medication she had received a few minutes before. Seeing little purpose in pursuing the question, since no conclusive arrangement had been struck between them, Beverly muttered, "Right, whatever makes you happy," and fell onto the first bed, where she lay staring upward with her arms across her chest. While her eyes flitted here and there across the ceiling, Beverly thought of the many things she might have liked to interrogate Jennifer about, such as what her gang, or whatever they were, planned to do, and now that they were all trapped together in the same psychiatric ward, and why she was so excited over the weather, and who this poet was about whom Melissa had been so hotly impelled to turn mum. She and Jennifer had continued from that morning along a route of such shared antagonism that it now seemed irregular to propose a civil conversation, even when Jennifer appeared so peaceful. For herself, Beverly was settled in the belief that, somewhat to her terror, her roommate was most likely the most disturbed person in the whole of the ward, and that Jennifer's companions, such as she had observed, were merely the suggestible accessories to her lunacy, which they likely considered an entertaining alternative to the mundane courses they might have otherwise been left to follow. For all those reasonable sorts who laughed and shook their heads at history's countless zealots, schismatics, and mountebanks, Beverly recognized there were a smaller portion who found in their unhinged fulminations a ready escape hatch from the chores of the rational citizen. She remembered reading in a history of the church of a man named Peter the Hermit, who stirred up his own army of unshod and imbecile commoners, men and women both, to form a disastrous military expedition to the Holy Land at the time of the First Crusade. Most of them died of thirst and exhaustion in the desert after sacking the villages of fellow Christians, whom they mistook for Saracens, murdering them with the implements of husbandry they wielded for want of swords. Beverly supposed to herself that the long-sleeved girls were not very different from the peasants of Peter's tragic march, happy merely to have a clear voice to follow, however ridiculous its declamations. Beverly repined there for minutes which she had no means to count, following her thoughts through indistinct catacombs and losing them in unseen crevices, wondering whether the weariness she felt was the work of the pill she had been made to swallow, or whether it was merely the natural response to being imprisoned in a place where nothing was expected of her but that she make no marks upon herself. The humorless irony of the matter was that Beverly's proclivity for drawing forth her own blood was hardly ever inspired by any anxiety or gnawing internal torment, but instead by simple boredom. Amidst the shuffling of the sisters, and the whispering of her schoolmates, and the abstract expressions of the marble saints and suspended saviours, the sting of the razor roused her from the somnolent drift, restoring her animal senses. Beverly had gone to her little bloom bathroom stall every evening in search of panic, sometimes leaving the door unlatched, daring that someone would stumble in and break her world open with a shriek. When one of her confidants bragged to her in a tone of disingenuous self-recrimination of her own hidden gallery of scratches, Beverly heard another lock clapping shut across her dungeon door. She was sorry to see her selfish little pastime become what it had then had to be, a contest, a clandestine marathon of bloodletters. Now, with Jennifer on the bed by the window, absently running her fingers across her bandages, Beverly mused briefly that she was like Psyche, who had been carried away to Olympus and was finding immortality dull. At least St. Teresa's had a library. She could go there and sit in the aisles and fill herself up with a smell of scholarly decomposition and begin books in the middle without reading their titles and sip gamefully at their words till she was dizzy and her heart was replete. Encouraged by this memory, Beverly bolted from her bed and left the room in a flurry, while Jennifer arose and marked her departure with alarmed curiosity. In the wide hallway, Beverly went to the reception desk, where she stood silently for a moment, waiting for the two nurses, one old and stern, the other younger and quite cheerful, to pause their conversation and take note of her. When she had gained their attention, Beverly asked, "I'm sorry, but I'm wondering if there is any place in this ward where I might find a book to read." "Why, yes, young lady," responded the older nurse, with whom she had not long before argued about her medication. "There are quite a few magazines lying around in the recreation room and in the other sitting areas. Fashion magazines, news periodicals, and so forth. Feel free to look for one." "All right," said Beverly, "but what I'm really wondering is whether you have any actual books, like novels." Giving her much the same look as she had when Beverly was questioning her dosage, the nurse said, "There's a bookshelf containing novels and the like in the activities room, which will be opening tomorrow. I'm sure you can wait till then." "Can it be opened earlier than that?" asked Beverly, "for just long enough for me to run in, pick up a book, and run out again?" "I'm sorry," said the nurse, "but that room can only be opened by authorized personnel at officially scheduled times. It isn't open for individual patients, ever." "Good Lord," sighed Beverly. "I'm sure, young lady," said the nurse, "that you can amuse yourself for the moment with one of the magazines available in the public areas. You can take as many as you like, as long as you return them afterward. Or you can always watch television with the others in the recreation room. Several of the ladies generally like to watch their daytime dramas at about this hour. They certainly wouldn't object to your joining them." Convinced now of the futility of her inquiry, Beverly looked dejectedly down at the desk before starting up again and asking, "Am I supposed to see a doctor anytime soon? I'd very much like to ask about the medications I'm taking and how much longer I can expect to be kept here." "Most of our patients are scheduled 2 therapy sessions a week," said the nurse, as if she were reciting the Pythagorean theorem. "I can find out when your next appointment is if you remind me what your last name is." Yes, it's Kiernan," said Beverly. With the wheels of her chair chirping beneath her, the nurse turned to the computer nearest to her and, squinting through her rectangular spectacles at the screen, entered a few short bursts of typing, punctuated with definite punches of the enter key. "Beverly Kiernan," she said under her breath, tracing the screen with a carefully manicured fingertip. "Here. Dr. Martin will be seeing you again Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. "Thursday," said Beverly. "But that's the day after tomorrow. What am I supposed to do till then?" "That's entirely up to you, young lady," said the nurse. "There are group activities provided throughout the day, such as you've already had this morning. Otherwise, your time is yours to use as you like. Consider it a vacation from your everyday cares." "Oh, yes," muttered Beverly. "I'll just spin away the hours listening to the seagulls as they glide in and out of the galloping sea foam." The younger and plumper of the nurses, who had hitherto kept silent, heard this stab of wit and was shaken by a few hiccups of laughter, to which the elder nurse counterfeited oblivion. Presently Beverly felt herself oppressed by an even greater weariness than she had felt before excursing from her room. She leaned forward upon the desk for a moment, while the world before her eyes split briefly in two. The second nurse arose with a look of consternation, seemingly fearing that Beverly would lose her footing. The fainting spell passed in an instant, though, and Beverly stood straight again, confusion befogging her countenance. "Miss Kiernan?" the elder nurse said, but Beverly had already turned with quick steps back to her room, one hand held to her forehead. As her colleague took her seat again, the nurse said, "They're a privileged generation, there's no doubt about it. They get themselves tossed into the psych ward, and they expect it to be like the Ritz-Carlton." The younger of the nurses shook her head, a look of hesitant bemusement on her face. "She looked awfully green for a moment there," she said. "Do you think I ought to have taken her vital signs?" "No," said the elder. "She just isn't used to the medications yet. She'll feel better after she rests." "I don't know how she could rest, frankly," said the younger. "That new roommate of hers is one chilly little character. I sleep with one eye open around her." "Jennifer Sutton?" said the elder. "I see nothing unusual about her. She looks the same as the rest of the cutters who are crammed in here over the last couple of months. It's utterly beyond me how most of them ever got committed. They look rebellious enough, but in all my years here, I've never seen such a quiet, docile bunch of teenagers. They just take their medications, stay in their rooms, and never utter a peep." "Isn't it obvious?" said the younger. "They're all depressed beyond belief. It's like you always hear, it's the quiet ones you have to watch out for. With all the text messages and internet chatting and so forth, they're so disconnected from reality they can't tell the difference between life and death. Either they're walking into school with a duffel bag full of hand grenades, or they're slitting their wrists in front of their webcams while some morbid little cyber pal eggs them on from across the continent. Back when I graduated high school, we had kids that died in car accidents on their way home from parties, or fell out of trees after mowing through 12-packs. Whatever. They were trying to have fun. Now somebody posts a nasty rumor on a website, and the next thing you know, there's a 14-year-old hanging by a light fixture and a conspiracy charge against her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend's best friend. Where's the fun in that? It's all drama, drama, drama with kids these days. They've made depression into a form of identity. Ha! Said the other, pulling a roll of breath mints from her smock pocket and chapping one into her hand. It almost makes one thankful for the increase in teenage pregnancy. The younger nurse accepted a mint, which she flung into her mouth, and asked, "Why do you say that?" "Because," said the elder, "it's hard to act tragic when you've got another mouth to feed besides your own." The second nurse sucked at her mint pensively for a moment. "Hard," she said, flipping the mint from one cheek to the opposite, "but not at all impossible." End of chapter 6. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis-Toman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 7. The instant Beverly had tripped into her room, looking at the floor and aiming her steps intently toward the bed, she heard Jennifer's voice from the direction of the window saying, "Have you been hearing what I've been hearing?" "Whatever the voices in your head are saying, Jennifer," Beverly mumbled, "you're the only one that can hear them, and no one else will believe you." "No, shh, quiet," said Jennifer. "Just listen." "Fine," said Beverly, as she keeled over onto her bed. "I'm listening." The bed squeaked and groaned noisily beneath her as she rolled onto her side. "Damn it," Jennifer hissed. "Stop flopping around and listen." Beverly held her breath and tensed her muscles. After a number of seconds, beyond the interminable murmuring of machines and paging announcements, there was a whip-like crack and a portentous rumble. "Thunder," said Beverly. "Hooray." "Yes, thunder," Jennifer whispered. "But what else? Do you hear it?" Again, Beverly sucked her breath in, closing her eyes and turning her face toward the window. Siren? An ambulance siren?" she said. "Is that what you mean?" "Yes," said Jennifer, "and it's coming closer." Beverly sat up and regarded Jennifer with eyes full of pity and condescension. "Jennifer," she said, "we're in a hospital. Where else would an ambulance be going?" "Yes, but look," said Jennifer. Beverly groaned, set her head down on the pillow, but remained otherwise unmoved. "Look!" cried Jennifer again. "Here he comes." Induced by curiosity to rise, Beverly shuffled to the window and looked sleepily over Jennifer's slender shoulders. Outside, the rain had whipped itself into a tempest, and though it was still early in the afternoon, the low-slung sky had grown dark as dusk. Seeming to struggle against the wind and water, a white ambulance was careening towards the hospital, its lights bursting like gunfire in the gloom, its siren like an orphaned infant's wail, and, to Beverly's unspeakable awe, from the bowels of the clouds, an unbroken rod of crooked, writhing lightning flashed over the roof of the tormented coach, seeming to guide it on its wild way as a child would guide a toy. Gasping, Beverly clutched Jennifer by the arm and mouthed a silent oath. The ambulance reeled about towards the canopy that overarched the emergency exit. At the moment it disappeared from the girl's view, the shaft of lightning receded like a viper recoiling into the churning umbrage above. Jennifer wrested Beverly from her feet, casting her arms around her and plummeting with her onto the affronted frame of the weaving bed. With a shout of ecstasy, she kissed Beverly's face, stared into her petrified eyes, then kissed her again. End of chapter 7. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis-Toman. Read by the author. Chapter 8 of The Blood Groom. 7 white floors and 7 white ceilings beneath this abrupt scene of passion. The emergency unit had recovered from a brief quiescent lull and returned to its more typical state of furious confusion. Through the bay doors, 3 medics wielded a rattling stretcher like infantrymen with a medieval battering ram. Upon it lay a slight, unmoving shape. Rocking against the straps that fixed it down, a translucent blue oxygen mask pressed over its face by one of the medics, who skipped along the stretcher's side, dull-eyed and open-mouthed. At once, the stretcher and the medics steering it were ensconced in a convergence of blue-shirted nurses, one of whom, the ranking nurse, asked, "What have we got?" Panting to recover his breath, the medic in the lead of the trolley's awkward conveyance shook his head, solemn-faced. "Nothing. Just a body," he said. He flatlined before we could get him through the doors. The medic at the side of the stretcher continued to hold the oxygen mask in place, helplessly awaiting confirmation of its futility. "How long ago?" asked the nurse, pushing past to scrutinize the newcomer. "I don't know, maybe 30 seconds, almost a minute ago," said the medic. "But we've been working on him for more than 5 minutes, and all he's done is slip further away. He was cooked by the time we found him." "Cooked?" said the nurse. She reached for his arm, her fingers poised for the measuring of what she already expected to be a non-existent pulse. With an ejaculation of surprise, she said, "What's all this on his wrist?" "That's all the gauze we could throw at him while trying to get his heart moving again," said the medic. "We pulled him out of a bathtub with his wrist sliced to shreds and a plugged-in 40-watt desk lamp submerged in the water. He was basically basted in his own blood." The medic with the oxygen mask held up the figure's still pliant right arm, the counterpart of which the nurse was examining. "We can't get him to let go of the razor he used," she said flatly. "I think it's welded onto his fingertips." The nurse looked at the man's face, her lips tightening. He was a young, fine-featured, his skin still pink. She said, "Keep that mask on him and prepare the AED." "We're past that stage," said the first medic. "That's the first thing we tried, obviously. Once he's flatlined, that's it. He's not coming back." "Well, then it can't hurt, can it?" said the nurse. "Stand aside." "Have you lost it?" continued the medic. "You know you can't defibrillate an assisted heart. He's already been electrocuted once." "Stand aside," said the nurse again, planting the electrodes in their places and pressing the button while the machine's no-shock light blinked pointlessly. A surge rang through the young man's body, and it lurched against its restraints. Throwing the electrodes aside, she delivered a series of determined pumps to the man's chest, her eyes watching the green line on the screen behind her, which lay as calm and undisturbed as the open sea on a windless day. "Finished?" said the medic. The nurse picked up the electrodes and put them back in place again. "One more," she said, "then I'll believe he's gone. Stand here, please." The medic threw up his hands in a signal of surrender, darkly hissing. "Incredible," as he turned his back to his stretcher. As the machine charged again, and he heard a second booming pulse, he flinched. Then, wearing a benign expression, he turned around again and said, "All right, that's enough fun for one." "He's coming back," shouted the nurse, again hammering at the man's bare chest with her cupped palms. "Look at the monitor." Truly, the medic peered with his jaws agape as the perfect blank stream representing the man's heartbeat grew suddenly agitated, its smooth form riled by a succession of sharp peaks which soon conformed to a familiar regularity. "Transfusion!" cried the nurse, her wild, elated eyes sweeping through the disbelieving crowd of her colleagues, and her hands still folded over the young man's chest. Why are you standing around? He needs blood! Come on, let's get him into a gurney." The two other medics shook off their stupor and began hoisting the still motionless figure away, while nurses followed behind them with machines. The nurse who had performed the miracle stayed behind, a transported smile riveted to her face. "You shouldn't have done that," said the first medic, who also remained. "Heartbeat or no, after 4 minutes of flatlining, that guy's got to be absolutely brain dead. I don't know how the hell you got a pulse again, but you should have left him alone." "I know I should have," the nurse responded ecstatically, "but I looked at him and I couldn't. Something told me that if I just tried the AED again, he'd come back, and somehow, don't ask me how, it worked. It was like he was just in there somewhere, silently waiting for somebody to take the chance, and when I did, whoosh, I hardly did anything." "I'm not going to try to explain it," said the medic. "All I'm saying is that whatever you've managed to bring back, it's not a person anymore. It's a grilled vegetable with a heartbeat. Nobody loses that much blood then spends that much time without a pulse, then just pops up his old functional self again. On top of that, his brains were probably sizzled beyond all repair by the electrocution. I'm sorry to say it, but whether your bringing him back was an act of God or a fluke of nature, I sure hope it doesn't last long. That guy's no good to anyone alive. The nurse's eyes flared with horror at the medic's heartless disposition. She turned a stiff back to him and, marching down the hall toward where the stretcher had been taken, said, "I bet that's exactly what he was thinking to himself when he climbed into the bathtub." End of chapter 8. The Blood Groom by Damien Tavis Toman, read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 9. Jennifer's small weight, by which she battened Beverly to the bed, was amply aided by the wonderful swiftness of her motion. She had yanked Beverly entirely from where she had been planted and now held her firm by the power of a single spriggish arm. Beverly had, at the first instant, been too shocked to cry out, her breath having fled from her in the moment of Jennifer's embrace. If the warmth of friendship had yet made any obtrusion into their day's worth of involuntary cohabitation, Jennifer's present gesture was cast far beyond its nascent reach, and Beverly, little experienced in acts of spontaneous tenderness, was found altogether unprepared. And so, at the second kiss from Jennifer's strange, thin lips, Beverly began to shout, her pleas for release spiked with an interspersion of curses. Rather than simply rolling aside and allowing Beverly to rise, Jennifer was struck with panic and, endeavoring to fix her hand over Beverly's open mouth, held her only more sternly, rising above her and begging her to be silent. Confusion compounded upon confusion, and Beverly's senses were still disordered by the prodigy of the lightning she had witnessed a few moments before, and the torrent outside rushed angrily against the window and wall. The room was dark, the world a roar of bewilderment. The more Jennifer implored, the louder Beverly screamed. Her head pressed far into the bed by Jennifer's hand, Beverly rolled her eyes upward to see the door of the room thrown open by a nurse who bellowed for security, then rushed for the bed where she grabbed Jennifer by the shoulder, crying, "What the hell are you doing? Get off of her! Get off!" "No, it's all right," shouted Jennifer in return, and jumped off Beverly, knocking the nurse backward into the rain-buffeted window and its clattering plastic blinds. "Everything's all right. I didn't do anything to her." She reeled about when the door was battered open a second time, now by two white-shirted guards who hung for a moment in an attitude of suspended alarm. "Restrain her," the nurse said, her finger flailing in Jennifer's direction. She was attacking her roommate. But Jennifer ducked away from the guard's outstretched arms, taking vain refuge in the space between the two beds, clenching the curtain that stood retracted by the wall. The guards plodded cautiously forward, one at the head, who Beverly saw was one of the men who had escorted her to the ward, exhorting in low tones for Jennifer to be calm. The slight-framed girl, pierced lip quivering, seemed to shrink into her shadow, whimpering, "Don't you touch me! Don't you touch me! I'm telling you! Stay back!" While Beverly scrambled off the bed and secured herself in the corner, Jennifer suddenly whipped the pillow from near where Beverly's head had been and held it before her, shield-like. With a primal shriek, she hurled herself directly into the advancing men who, momentarily shocked into jumping aside, quickly recovered themselves and caught the fragile girl up, each one claiming an arm. Jennifer's feet tripped upon the thin white pillow and she collapsed forward, her knees cracking down upon the floor. She crumpled beneath her captors, sobbing unreservedly. A veil of pity opened on Beverly, and she nearly began to plead with the guards to let Jennifer alone. But a stretcher had already appeared, and Jennifer, convulsing with tears, was being lifted softly onto it, and her strength for being strapped into place. The melodrama had run its course, and Beverly had no hope of explaining what she herself was helpless to understand. Shivering, she observed without expression as Jennifer, this most distant of entities, was trucked indecorously away. "Are you hurt?" asked the nurse, who, looking shaken and distracted, immediately went to return the pillow to the bed. "No, I'm all right," Beverly muttered. "Do you know what she was trying to do to you?" asked the nurse. Beverly looked at the ground and held herself tighter. No, she said. I'm not sure. She just got very excited all of a sudden. I don't think she wanted to hurt me. Excited? Said the nurse. About what, do you think? Beverly might have told her about the phenomenon that she and Jennifer had seen out the window, but she was reminded that describing such a thing in a psychiatric hospital to a psychiatric nurse would do little good, except to secure an increase in her level of sedation. Even now, whether out of emotional strain or chemical interference, Beverly questioned the reality of everything that had just occurred. She felt as if she might have daydreamt it all or watched it remotely as from a camera on the ceiling. I don't know, she said. She must have taken something I did as a sign that I was interested in her. Physically. The nurse shook her head with a look of revulsion. Why don't you lie down and try to rest your mind, she said, making an inviting gesture toward the bed. I'll just go and call in a doctor for you to talk to. Everything's going to be fine, okay? Okay, said Beverly, appeasing the nurse by taking a seat on the side of the bed. As the nurse turned for the door, Beverly swung around and in a cracked voice said, Wait, what's going to happen to Jennifer? Jennifer will be fine, said the nurse, her hand upon the door. As she slid into the hallway, she hesitated, pivoting the door back and forth a little upon its hinges. Open or closed, she asked. Beverly took the pillow in her arms. Closed, she said. End of chapter 9. The Blood Groom by Damien Davis Truman. Read by the author. The Blood Groom, Chapter 10. Well, well, said the plump Dr. Martin, who whisked into the room after delivering 2 paltry knocks and not waiting for an answer. I wasn't expecting to see you again till tomorrow, but I just heard about what happened. You must be a little rattled. Beverly sat up and followed Dr. Martin with her eyes as he strolled to the foot of her bed. I guess so, she said. I'm mainly just tired. I imagine I'd be freaked out if I weren't so heavily drugged. Are you quite sure that you're not hurt at all? Said Dr. Martin. No bites, scratches, bruises, no pain anywhere? Beverly shook her head. I'm sure, she said. Why don't you explain to me exactly what happened, said the doctor. Give me as much detail as you possibly can. Sighing, Beverly closed her eyes and began to speak, her words dropping lazily from hardly moving lips. I had gone out to the nurse's desk to see if I could get something to read, she said. I started feeling woozy, so I came back to my bed. As soon as I had laid down, though, Jennifer started saying something to me about hearing sirens. I told her that we were at the hospital and that it was normal to hear sirens, but she wouldn't leave me alone until I'd come to look out the window with her. We watched an ambulance pulling into the emergency entrance below us, and then Jennifer just jumped on me. So I screamed. And the nurse came, and then security guards, and that's how the whole thing happened. That's it, huh? Said Dr. Martin. Pretty much, said Beverly. Dr. Martin took a ballpoint pen out of his coat pocket, a fat plastic one with the name of a medication written across both sides. He clicked it open, clicked it closed, and scratched his beard with the round white button on the top. He took a seat on the edge of the opposite bed, drawing out a white notepad. Okay, he said. Before she jumped on you, while you were looking out the window, did she say anything? Anything you can remember? Yes, said Beverly. She said, Here he comes. Here who comes? Asked the doctor. I don't know, said Beverly. The ambulance, the person in the ambulance, some figment of her imagination. I really have no idea. Jennifer has been saying things that don't make the slightest bit of sense from the moment she arrived. My personal feeling is that she's far more demented than anyone here realizes. Here he comes, murmured Dr. Martin, and he scribbled it onto his pad, clicking his pen open and closed again. You're positive that's all she said? Beverly nodded that she was positive. Right, so she jumped on you, and what did she do then? Said the doctor. Beverly felt her cheeks flushing red and her heart floating like a buoy to some higher point in her chest. She kissed me, she mumbled. Oh, said the doctor. Twice, said Beverly. Twice, said the doctor. On the lips, said Beverly. Ah, said the doctor. He stood up, clicked his pen open, and closed 3 times, and then returned it to his pocket. Do you still want something to read? A book? A magazine? Yes, sort of, said Beverly. I mean, definitely. A book, please. What do you like? Asked the doctor. Mystery? Romance? I like classics, said Beverly. The old stuff, Literature. I see, said Dr. Martin. I think we can rustle something up for you, after dinner perhaps. Beverly sat up a little straighter and nodded. Can I make a phone call to my father? She asked. Of course, said Dr. Martin. You can make or receive phone calls any time during waking hours. Just go see the nurses at the desk and they'll show you how it works. Great, thanks, said Beverly. Beverly, said Dr. Martin, a grey seriousness washing over his countenance. We're very sorry for what happened to you today. We truly had no idea Jennifer would do anything like that. She seemed so docile, and she basically just came here of her own free will. We hope you can understand. Professionals though we are, sometimes even we can be surprised. Beverly cleared her throat, letting her eyes fall on some indeterminate nexus between the two floor tiles, searching for a response. She almost said, Whatever, all I know is that I hate it here and I want to go home. But politeness forbade it, and on reflection, home was not truly where she wanted to be, nor did she want to be there at the hospital, nor back at St. Teresa of Avila's, nor anywhere she knew. She felt as if she was nowhere already, a nobody, belonging nowhere, belonging to no one. She found herself preoccupied with Jennifer and what the other long-sleeved girls would do now that their leader had been carted away. They're all going to hate me now, she thought. But the thought went unspoken, and after several moments of silence, Dr. Martin smiled remorsefully and quietly took his leave of her. End of chapter 10.